great body. I yield back the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. While the pending legislation in the Senate is a bill that would prohibit discrimination against gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender workers, we've mostly heard general speeches on other topics on the floor today. Right now, live coverage continues on C-SPAN of a Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing on the UN Human Rights Treaty for people with disabilities. And if you want to see all of that hearing, we'll have it here on C-SPAN 2 tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern. And more live coverage later on tonight. Once the polls close, we'll bring you live election results and the governor's races in Virginia and New Jersey, with victory and concession speeches and your calls and tweets. That's on C-SPAN tonight, starting at 9 Eastern, and also on C-SPAN Radio and cspan.org. As we wait for a senator to speak, we'll hear about the effects of the government shutdown and the debt ceiling debate on immigration reform from this morning's Washington Journal.
Joining us now, Hector Barreto of the Latino Coalition. He serves as their chairman, but you may remember that he was the former administrator for the Small Business Administration, served from 2001 to 2006. Mr. Barreto, welcome.
Great to be here, Pedro.
For those who don't know, what's the Latino Coalition?
Latino Coalition is a nationwide organization. About 65-plus organizations are part of it. We focus on economic development for small businesses in the Hispanic community, but we're also very interested in health care and education, and those are the top three issues in the Latino community.
Given your current experience and your past experience, what are small businesses looking for from Washington?
Some clarity, some certitude, a little bit of help, and not so much barriers. You know, small businesses need the same thing that they've always needed. They need more capital, they need to grow their capacity, and they need more contracts. And lately, it's been a little difficult to see where that's coming from Washington, D.C.
How so?
Well, I just think that, you know, obviously government shutdown doesn't help anybody. I mean, those loans aren't going to happen. People aren't going to get trained. They're not going to be able to get access to contracts. And so, you know, one of the things that they're looking for is, you know, an environment where they can start those businesses and grow those over the long term. And lately, the environment's been a little bit rocky for small business.
And specifically how?
Well, again, everything seems to be costing more. I mean, you know, obviously they're not happy with the level of taxes they pay. Healthcare costs are going through the roof. There's more regulation now than ever before. So, I mean, those are difficult headwinds for small businesses. And remember, small businesses are the engine that fuel the economy of the United States. That's the place that 2/3 of the net new jobs come from. A lot of the productivity of our economy has always come from there. Most of our exporters and importers are small businesses. And so when times are tough or when they're slow, it's very difficult for those businesses to hire new employees, to add to their inventories, and to really make the investments necessary to fuel our economy.
From a small business perspective, you said you wanted clarity, certitude, a little help, and not a lot of regulation. How do you balance those things? At the same time, you're asking for a little help, but at the same time, you don't want regulation to hinder the business.
Well, I mean, I don't think that those things are necessarily mutually exclusive. I think that, you know, small businesses, you know, they don't expect a hand out. I mean, you know, most anybody that's been in a small business, they're willing to work really hard for what they get. But, you know, at the same time that they're looking for some of these tools, again, they don't want to feel like they're under attack by the people that are supposed to represent them in D.C. And oftentimes, that's the way small businesses feel.
As far as this Congress is concerned, how helpful have they been to the small business?
Well, I mean, again, for a lot of small businesses, it's hard for them to relate to what a lot of the arguments are that are going on here in D.C. I mean, they have to wake up every day and figure out how to make a payroll, figure out how to keep customers coming in the door. And when they see both sides fighting the way that they've been fighting, they say, wait, what about us? You know, they're supposed to be representing us. You know, a lot of politicians on both sides of the aisle, they always say nice things about small business, but, you know, where does the rubber meet the road? Where is that help really coming from? You know, small businesses aren't seeing it easier to get access to capital, okay? And capital is critically important. It's the oxygen that small businesses need to breathe, not just to get started, but to grow over the long term. They're not seeing a lot of that capital. They're not seeing as much business opportunities. You know, they just see a lot of problems. They don't see a lot of solutions, and I think that's what frustrates so many of those 28 million small businesses.
Our guest is Hector Barreto. He joins us as chairman of the Latino Coalition, also the former administrator for the Small Business Administration. If you want to ask some questions about small businesses and related topics, you can do so on the lines on the screen, 202-585-3880 for Democrats, 202-585-3881 for Republicans, 202-585-3882 for independents, and you can also tweet us at C-SPAN WJ. send us email too at cspan, or journal@cspan.org. Hector Barreto, is government biased towards big business?
I wouldn't say it's biased towards big business. I mean, you know, again, we believe that business of all kinds is critically important. So, I mean, small businesses depend on big business as well for procurement and contracts. Oftentimes, small businesses become big business. So I don't know that they feel that it's us against them, in other words, small businesses against big businesses, but they just really feel like there's just not a lot of positive things coming out of Washington, D.C. Some of that could be perception, but the reality on the street is well, too many small businesses are still struggling. You know, we lose 50% of small businesses within the first 4 years. It's not because they're not working hard or they don't have good ideas. Oftentimes they don't know what they don't know, but that's why I think that they need government and business working together to create that environment that we all need to fuel this economy.
What kind of small businesses could get loans from the government?
Well, any kind of small business could potentially get a loan from the government. If you're a small business, by the way, in the United States, 99% of all businesses are considered small businesses. If you produce something and you have less than 500 employees, you can qualify as a small business. If you don't produce something, you're selling a service, it's a revenue size standard, but usually that's $5–6 million a year, so most businesses fall underneath that.
And so when it comes to issues, say, health care, we hear a lot of people on this program, especially those who represent small business, say that passage of the Affordable Care Act is going to affect the small business. What's your perspective?
It's been a killer. You know, when I first started at SBA, this is in 2001, I thought they were going to be asking me for loans, but a lot of times small businesses were asking for health care solutions. And they're saying, we're the only group that doesn't have access to affordable health care. If you work for the government or you're a member of a union or you work for a large corporation, that's taken care of for you. But if you're a small business, good luck, you're on your own. Now, they weren't looking for necessarily a government-wide solution. They didn't want health care taken away from them. They just wanted the premiums to slow down because that goes right to the bottom line. They can't pass that on to their customer. And so they were getting killed year after year with double-digit increases. I don't think things have gotten any better. I mean, I think that a lot of small businesses feel like we were promised a lot of stuff here. We were promised that we would have more choices, more access, premiums were going to go down, it was going to be easier than ever. We haven't seen it. And, you know, this rollout has been obviously very problematic, but remember, the next rollout is going to be that small business mandate, which they're going to be affected by next year. And small businesses are very worried because they're saying, look, if it's going this bad right now, what's it going to be like for us when we have to be applicable to that mandate?
So what are small businesses now that have this year holdout, what are they looking for in that year? What kind of clarification are they looking for?
I think they're waiting to see if this thing is going to work, and if it's not going to work, what are the solutions that are going to be proffered by either side to fix it? You know, again, small businesses really feel that they're really at the, you know, the front of this storm, if you will, and again, they're the ones that are getting killed with health care costs and the inability to be able to provide these benefits to their employees.
We have a message or a tweet here saying, what's the major issue that Hispanic businesses must overcome to be successful? Is it the same issue for other races or different?
You know, I've always said this, you know, Hispanic small businesses don't need something different than any other small business need. They need those tools that we talked about. They need capital. They're not getting capital. They need to be, you know, have their capacity grow. And what I mean by that is really technical assistance. They may be good at doing one thing, but they're not good at doing other things. And so they need help doing that as well. They need more business. Any kind of small business needs the same thing the big business needs. They need more business. And right now that they're not seeing it. So those tools are critically important. And I would add a fourth C. Those are my C's. But they've got to be able to control their costs. And as I said, everything seems to be costing more. Energy, health care, the taxes that they're paying, the being able to comply with all the regulations that they're faced with. So being able to control those costs are really important as well.
Shana also mentions the topic of capital on Twitter this morning, saying that you hit the nail on the head. Small business needs capital. Big banks are not extending loans. The system is stacked against small business.
Well, you know, again, this has always been a perennial challenge. And let me just say this, that it is more difficult to get loans from a bank. But there are still a lot of lending institutions that want to do business with small business. And by the way, you know, my former agency has a big role to play in that. They were the largest guarantor and still are the largest guarantor of small business loans in the country. In other words, loans that might not be made without that guarantee are being made. By the way, that is about $1 billion a month that the SBA is approving. So again, when government's not working, there's $1 billion that's not being invested back into the economy.
So those loans are to help start businesses, help build business, expand. What gamut do they cover?
Well, everything. I mean, they can be for startup businesses, and those can be very small loans, maybe micro loans, maybe, you know, under $50,000. They can be loans to buy equipment, to buy a building, to expand. And by the way, you need capital all throughout your business life. You could be a Fortune 500 company. You still need access to capital. So that never changes. So this is a perennial issue. And again, it's just been very, very challenging over the last few years for small businesses to get access to that capital.
Here's Woody from Tampa, Florida, on our phone lines. He's on our independent line. Woody, good morning.
Good morning. I seem to believe that the problem that we're having in this country right now is that most of the people in Washington and a lot of the people in big business are still treating this problem as if it were a supply-side problem and dealing with it in that fashion. Whereas what we have now is something we haven't seen since the Great Depression, which is a demand-side economy. We're not going to be able to manufacture any more stuff if nobody...
Mr. President, I ask that the call of the quorum be vacated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, what is the pending business before the Senate?
We're on a motion to proceed to S-815.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to speak 10 minutes as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, I come to the floor today to really speak about how we can avoid another shutdown of our government and also, even more important, avoid another shutdown or slowdown of our economy. And that's how we in the Congress, both sides of the aisle, both sides of the dome, need to work to arrive at a budget agreement and then an appropriations agreement for the rest of the fiscal year. Earlier today on the floor, we heard from the distinguished chair of the Budget Committee, the gentlelady from Washington State, Patty Murray, to talk about the budget and what was going on. I come here today to support her efforts and the work of the budget conferees as they work to reach an agreement on the funding levels that will invest in America's future, creating jobs, repairing infrastructure, keeping us safe in our communities, and making sure that our children are well educated for the 21st century. The budget conference is absolutely important to America's future because it's how much should we invest in America's future, what should we do in terms of revenue, how do we close corporate loopholes and corporate welfare, and also have them step up to their patriotic responsibility, and also what is the best way to approach the funding for this government. There is no doubt that we need to reduce public debt, but austerity alone is not the answer. We've seen it in Europe where, yes, they've reduced their public debt, but they have not been pro-growth. The agenda that I stand for, and I know that the chair of the Budget Committee does, and many of us on both sides of the aisle, is we not only want to reduce public debt, we also want to reduce unemployment. And we also want to reduce things like crime rates. So we need to be able to work together. My goals for the conference committee that's meeting are simple and straightforward. I would like to see the Budget Committee come up with not only a one-year framework, but a two-year framework, giving a top-line funding level for 2014 and 2015, and replacing the sequester policy for at least 2 years. And to do that with increased revenues and strategic cuts, a balanced approach. Now, let me say why this is important. because many people do not understand the difference between the Budget Committee and the Appropriations Committee. The Budget Committee looks at the entire budget of the government of the United States of America, money out and money in. So it looks at money out in two categories: discretionary spending, that's the Appropriations Committee; mandatory spending, that's Social Security, that's Medicare, that's veterans benefits. And then the other is revenue in, either through trust fund contributions or through fees or through taxes. The so-called top line is what discretionary spending is, what they allow for discretionary spending. In the budget, it's under an act called Section 30A of the budget. In order to do my job as the chair of the Appropriations Committee, need the Budget Committee, with the concurrence of the Congress, to give both my counterpart in the House, Congressman Rogers and Nita Lowey, myself and Senator Shelby, my vice chairman on the other side of the aisle, the so-called top line. Then we work through our 12 subcommittees. This is absolutely crucial because we cannot do discretionary spending for fiscal 14 till we hear from the Budget Committee. And we don't want another CR. We don't want another shutdown. We don't want another slowdown. We're ready to go to work. We've already done our due diligence. We've already worked through the subcommittees, 12 subcommittees, looking at what public investments should be made, and by the way, how we can be more frugal. How do we get rid of what is dated, what is duplicative, and what is dysfunctional? As the chair of the committee, again with Senator Shelby, the distinguished gentleman from Alabama, my vice chairman, we asked the committee to look at what is it we need to spend and what can we get rid of. We've done a great job this year. I'm really proud of them. And by August 1st, all of my subcommittees were marked up, but we need to have this agreement. So we say we need to have this agreement, and we need to have it sooner rather than later. Now, in the deal, the Budget Committee is to report out to the Congress and therefore to the Appropriations Committee by December 15th. I, with my committee and my counterparts in the House, are to produce an appropriations omnibus by January 15th. I don't want to get lost in words and the weeds here, but essentially, as it stands now, Congress will only be in session 8 days from December 15th to January 15th because of the holidays. 8 days is an awful lot to ask Barb Mikulski and Richard Shelby and Hal Rogers and Nita Lowey and our wonderful subcommittees to be able to produce a bill. So we'll do it if we have to, but we would prefer sooner rather than later. We feel so strongly about it that my House counterpart, Congressman Hal Rogers, a distinguished gentleman from Kentucky, and I say gentleman in the true sense of the word, civil, candid, straightforward, courteous. We've talked about issues, the differences in fiscal approach and so on, but we know how to get the job done. Where we differ, we know how to resolve the conflicts, and we're ready to go. We have sent a letter to the chair of the Budget Committee on both sides, to Senator Murray and to Paul Ryan, asking that they report to the Congress before the Thanksgiving recess. Before the Thanksgiving recess. This was unprecedented. Now, we didn't talk about dollars. That's the Budget Committee. We will take our pot of discretionary money, called the top line, and get it done. What both the House chairman and I are really worried about is that if we don't act, sequester kicks in January 15th. What an awful way to do business in our government. You heard how I said my subcommittee chairman have worked to look at what is dated, duplicative, and dysfunctional. That's just not meant to be an alliterative, clever throwaway line. It was a governing policy. Both sides of the aisle scrutinizing. And I'm just worried. I mean, when I look at defense, funding for defense would be $54 billion lower under the Senate's version in both defense and military construction. According to the military chiefs, the readiness of our force has been degraded under existing sequesters. 85% of Army brigade combat teams won't be fully deployed. The Navy and our Marine Corps will only have one carrier strike group and one amphibious ready group. They're always going to be Semper Fi, but we got to be Semper Fi too and always faithful to getting the job done. The Air Force will have to cut aircraft and possibly an entire fleet. This is a dangerous time in the world with numerous threats to our security, and we can't operate our military on the cheap. And just to give you a sense of what furlough meant, over 650,000 national security employees were initially furloughed, both in defense and intelligence and in other security positions in key government agencies. This is unacceptable. You can't protect a country and run a government like that. I chair the Commerce Justice Subcommittee. That's the committee that funds federal law enforcement, FBI, drug enforcement, U.S. Marshals, the U.S. attorneys that actually move this, the Bureau of Alcohol and Firearms. It keeps us safe from terrorism. It catches child predators, prosecutes drugs, drug dealers and gangs. You know, think of how the FBI went after the Boston Marathon killers. The CJS bill adds $2.3 billion above sequester levels to allow federal law enforcement to do their job. U.S. Marshals track down violent fugitives and sex offenders. DEA goes after not only drug dealers, but international drug cartels, so it doesn't make it to the playground or to the schoolroom. The new FBI director recently announced that if sequester continued, the FBI will have to furlough people up to 10 days over the next year. This is not good. In the long term, CR at the sequester level, a continuing resolution, will fund they will keep a hiring freeze of over 3,000 positions. You can't have the kind of law enforcement we need at those levels. So, Mr. President, I just say this. We have a big job to do. We have to do it sooner rather than later. I really ask the support of the Congress to the Budget Committee for them to really be able to bring a budget to the floor. Let's try to do it before the Thanksgiving break. Let's look at how we can look at a balanced approach between strategic cuts. And we on the Appropriations Committee are ready to keep on doing the job that we started almost 7 years ago under Senator Byrd, a wonderful, beloved, most beloved leader of West Virginia, Senator Inouye, Senator Stevens. We need to keep on doing that, but we need the Budget Committee to do their job. The impact on national security is really significant. The impact on our domestic economy is really significant. We need to be able to step up the plate and not only avoid a crisis like a shutdown, we also have to avoid the crisis of confidence that's occurring in our government. Can they govern? Can they get the job done? Are there significant pragmatists that will really look at what is the must-do list we have around spending, of which I think security for our country is at the top of the list? And I believe we can do it. I know the presiding officer was part of a bipartisan group during the shutdown to try to find a compromise. For that group, I salute them. They changed the tone, showed civility, showed bipartisanship, and I think their initial effort was enough to stimulate and encourage then coming to the final resolution that we did. That's the kind of spirit we need in the body. And I just say to my colleagues, let's have the Budget Committee act sooner rather than later. Let's support them in a balanced approach to not only look at austerity, but also growth. And that also means closing corporate loopholes. So, Madam President, I welcome you to the chair. And I think that concludes what I wanted to say today. But as we get ready to approach the holidays, I want the American people to have confidence in their government. And I want the American people to have confidence in those of us who've been elected. This is a big election day all over America. And I just recall this time last year, the re-election of President Obama, the election of the gentlelady from Massachusetts, the presiding officer today. It was a big day. It was a big deal. 20 women came to the Senate. New Democratic woman, a distinguished new woman from the state of Nebraska. And when they came, filled with excitement, filled with passion to serve the nation, represent and be the voice of the people in their state, and to get something done. And not only to do it in the lowest common denominator, but also to be able to work together for the common good and worry about the next generation, not the next election. That's what we did. Let's recall how we felt this time last year. Let's get our act together and press on. Madam President, I yield the floor. Madam President.
Senator from Maryland.
I was so excited talking about my topic, I forgot to note when I concluded the absence of a quorum. So I thereby note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll. Mr. Alexander.
On Capitol Hill today, the head of the federal agency charged with setting up the health insurance marketplaces testified before one of the Senate committees that helped write the health care law. During her testimony, Marilyn Tavenner, the head of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, faced questions about whether the administration misled Americans by telling them that they would be able to keep their health care plans. You can see that hearing in our overnight programming on C-SPAN and at cspan.org. And there'll be more about the health care law tomorrow. Health and Human Services Secretary Kathleen Sebelius will testify before the Senate Finance Committee. And that's live at 10 a.m. Eastern on C-SPAN. And The Hill writes that the White House today asked health insurers for help in quelling the growing furor over the cancellation of insurance plans under Obamacare. The story says that in a meeting at the White House, Obama's Chief of Staff, Dennis McDonough, asked insurance executives to explain to customers who are losing their plans what new options are available under Obamacare and what new subsidies they might qualify for. Some of the letters that people have been getting tell them they need to purchase more expensive, more comprehensive plans to replace them, sometimes without mentioning the new Obamacare plans that are now available. That in The Hill. We're going to continue now hearing more about the effect of the government shutdown and immigration reform from this morning's Washington Journal.
Stuff that they just finished building.
We'll leave it there, caller.
Well, interesting comment. I'm not sure that the solution is for government to hire more people. I don't know that government could hire enough people. You know, that just seems like more stimulus, and what we've seen already is the stimulus that has been tried early in the administration and over time hasn't really worked out that well. And by the way, it's not big business or government that hires most of the people. 2/3 of the net new jobs come from small businesses. So you're right. If small business isn't hiring, we're never going to get our unemployment down. We're never going to get this economy going again. By the way, we've seen signs where manufacturing is starting to tick up again in the United States because energy costs are lower here. You know, transportation costs to get the product to, you know, that market that you're talking about can be less. We're starting to see some of that manufacturing come back into the United States. We'd like to see more of it. But at the end of the day, it's small business that's really going to drive this economy, and we need to make sure that they're working and that they're being successful over the long term.
Woonsocket, Rhode Island. This is Bill, Independent Line. Hi.
How you doing?
You're on, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, I got comment and questions. Basically, on who decides on government whether or not to, like for the president, he only is allowed 2 terms, and all these others in the House of Representatives or the Senate can work as many terms as they want, and basically the Senate, they only work 6 months out of the year, and they get paid for the full year.
So what do you want our guest to address, sir?
Well, I want to address on saving money, you know, so basically if we allow the senators to only work 2 terms, like the president, we can, and let them work the full year, and then get paid a week's paid vacation like everybody else.
I'm not sure how much money that would save. I mean, I think you're talking about term limits, and obviously we don't have term limits for our federally elected officials. You know, some people would say, you know, the least they work, the less damage they're going to do. So, I mean, I think it kind of goes both ways. I would also tell you that, you know, I live out in California, and there's been a lot of discussion about term limits. Is it good or not? Sometimes when you have term limits, you're cycling people in and out so fast that there isn't a lot of institutional memory, and you get a lot more of this gridlock where people become so partisan on one side or the other, you can't get anything done. But interesting comment, and I think we'll just have to wait and see how that plays out over time. But there is definitely a lot of frustration. And again, this is not a partisan thing. I don't know if you saw where there was a survey done not too long ago where they gave people the option, if you could replace everybody in Congress, would you do it? An overwhelming majority of people said yes, and that's different than it has been in the past. In the past, they used to say, well, I hate Congress, but I love my congressman. Now people are saying is get rid of all of them. So I think Congress is going to have to pay attention to that and make sure that they're really concentrating on doing the people's business and not just their own internal business.
What are states doing to help businesses?
Well, states do a lot of things. I mean, they have a lot of economic development programs. They have some loan programs of their own. They work with government, for example, on training programs and things of that nature. State governments also have their own internal procurement goals. You know, at the federal level, government has to buy 23% of everything from small business. That's over $100 billion a year. But states have their own procurement programs as well. So, I mean, states are very engaged in this. And a lot of times states, I think, get it even more because they're closer to those small businesses that maybe sometimes our elected officials are in D.C. And they know that their states cannot grow, their states cannot get the tax revenue they need if you don't have a flourishing small business market. Oftentimes they're competing with other states to bring in more small businesses into their states.
So 23% of the goods from the government have to be bought by small businesses.
23%, and that's an annual goal. You know, I would tell you that sometimes government doesn't achieve that goal, and it's very important that they do, because remember, this is hundreds of billions of dollars that go back to small business. And by the way, government has to continuously look for new small businesses, because if you get a contract from the government and it's a multi-million-dollar contract, you're not considered a small business anymore. So that's an opportunity for new businesses to do business with the government.
Here is Glenn, Brookfield, Missouri, for our guest Hector Barreto of the Latino Coalition.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. I've got one comment to make. The American people keep saying term limits. Well, when are they going to wake up? Every congressman, every senator has a term limit. All they got to do is vote them out. I'll stop and take your answer on the phone. On the air.
Well, thank you for that call. And by the way, I'm from Missouri, and it's a great state, the show me state. And I think that's what a lot of people are saying right now. Show me that you're really worth re-electing. And I agree with you 100%. I think that, you know, we have an option to replace elected officials that are not doing the job for us. And for Congress, it's every 2 years. For Senate, it's every 6 years. Unfortunately, too many of our people still don't vote. I mean, 50% of folks don't vote. So, you know, I kind of subscribe to that old adage, you know, you're either part of the solution or you're part of the problem. If we're mad, if we're frustrated, if we want new leadership, then we have to get involved and we have to do something about it. So, you know, vote is critically important, and I think that that's a very important message to send to those 28 million small businesses and all Americans across the country.
Joy Mine off of Twitter says, aren't low wages a hindrance to business activity and consumer spending?
Well, you know, again, a lot of times folks, when they are just getting started on a career path, they may have to take a low-wage job. You know, my father was an immigrant to the United States, and he had a lot of low-wage jobs. But he always told us, I'm going to be an entrepreneur someday. I'm going to save my money. And that's what he did. And he had a long business career. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I think, obviously, you want to graduate to that next job and earn more money. And obviously, the more skills that you have, the more education that you have, the more ability you're going to have to get a higher-paying job.
On the flip side of that, in the Hill newspaper today, there's a piece by Eric Wasson saying that President Obama might soon renew his push for a $9 minimum wage.
President, in 2005, May of that year, the Senate faced a crisis that seems very familiar and very much like the one we face today in this body. Very simply, the Senate was unable to approve judges, which threatened to incapacitate a co-equal branch of our government, the United States judiciary. And it confronted the threat of what came to be called the nuclear option, a change in the rules that would have wrecked the collegiality and civility that has characterized this body. Members of both parties recognized that the situation was untenable, and they recognized as well that the American court system was too important for the Senate to simply stop approving judges and suspend that very important constitutional responsibility on behalf of this body. At the time, 14 senators came together to find a solution. They came to be known as the Gang of 14, 7 Republicans and 7 Democrats. And I want to read their names for the record because I think their conduct here characterized what is really perhaps best about this institution. They were Senators Robert Byrd, of West Virginia, Lincoln Chafee of Rhode Island, Susan Collins of Maine, Mike DeWine of Ohio, Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, Daniel Inouye of Hawaii, Mary Landrieu of Louisiana, Joseph Lieberman of Connecticut, John McCain of Arizona, Ben Nelson of Nebraska, Mark Pryor of Arizona, Ken Salazar of Colorado, Olympia Snow of Maine, and John Warner of Virginia. And what they devised was a quite simple solution. They were grappling with the same question that confronts us now. What can justify a member of the United States Senate voting to block consideration? In other words, to filibuster a nominee to the judicial branch. And their idea, simple as it was, had tremendous power. They agreed they would oppose a judicial nominee only in, quote, extraordinary circumstances. That was the gist of the agreement. There were other features to it, but their spirit and intent in this short phrase had profoundly meaningful impact. In fact, for the remainder of the Bush presidency, there were no more filibusters on judicial nominees. And those senators, with that short phrase, accomplished a historic impact. What did they mean by it? As one of them said at the time, quote, ideological attacks are not an extraordinary circumstance. It would have to be a character problem, an ethics problem, some allegations about the qualifications of a person, not an ideological bent, end quote. An ethics problem, a character problem, some allegations about the qualifications of a person. Today, Madam President, I ask for a renewed and revived commitment to the spirit of that agreement, a reinvigorated effort to apply that standard, and offer to work with my colleagues to revive that spirit of opposing a nominee and blocking that individual only in an extraordinary circumstance. And I come to the floor today because we have heard objections to a number of nominees on the basis of claims that clearly cannot constitute an extraordinary circumstance. Opposed through that 60-vote threshold, the filibuster, just last week, were a couple of nominees that clearly had qualifications to serve on the Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit. I rise in support today of another, Cornelia Pillard. Whatever has been said about this process, we have heard no extraordinary circumstance to oppose any of these nominees, and certainly not Ms. Pillard. Senators can always disagree about exactly what our courts should do and how we should divide and allocate resources. And the claim has been made here that the reason to oppose those nominees is that there is insufficient workload to justify them. The fact of the matter is that this Congress has approved the positions that are vacant and that they have been nominated to fill. I know that a lot of my colleagues have opinions on how to structure the court and what the workloads should be. But I would assume that these differences of opinion do not amount to extraordinary circumstances. They happen all the time. We debate what the workloads of the court should be. And certainly the job of this Senate and of every senator is to advise and consent on judicial nominations. If we refuse to consider the qualifications of a nominee, and if we make the judgment based on irrelevant consideration, we're failing to advise and consent. We can debate about the structure and the workload and the number of cases before a court, but they are not extraordinary circumstances. And the fact of the matter is that the workload of this court well justifies these nominations. In fact, it has grown in number since nominees were last approved. The waiting time for decisions on cases makes it 8th out of the 12 circuit courts. The cases themselves can't be judged only by the numbers, by the sheer volume of the caseload. The Senate, in my view, has to look also to the complexity and difficulty of the cases. I've argued before this circuit court, and I've participated in cases like the Microsoft appeal, which took months, in fact years, to resolve from start to finish, and involved precedential setting issues and decisions by the circuit court, and literally hours of argument. So the argument, in my view, about workload and about the need to fill or leave vacant, as the opponents say, that those vacancies is incorrect and wrong. And agreeing with me are the Judicial Conference and a majority of their colleagues, who also say the vacancies should be filled, as do judges from across the political spectrum and appointees of a lot of different presidents. But the point here is that disagreement, or even the claim that the workload doesn't justify it, is not an extraordinary circumstance, and that ought to be the standard, consistent with the Gang of 14's agreement. Now, I happen to believe that Cornelia Pillard is almost the ideal nominee. If you were to design someone, if you had that ability on the basis of record and talent and temperament, I don't think you could do much better. The D.C. court is said to be the second highest court in the country. I think they are all the second highest court. I don't think any one of them is better than the other. And by the way, I don't think that the decisions are more difficult in one circuit necessarily for judges than another. But what we want is an individual in each of these judgeships who is worthy of the immense responsibility, because for most litigants, the circuit court is the last stop on the litigation course. And Nina Pillard brings to this nomination not only brilliance in an academic sense, but a variety of experience and a record of thoughtful engagement with diverse views, a dedication to excellence and to public service. She has spent time in the classrooms as well as the courtrooms, and she is a civil rights hero as well as a public servant and an expert on the judicial system. In other words, if you had to design someone with a record and experience that is ideal for this court or any of the other circuit courts, you would pick Nina Pillard. Now, I'm going to come back to the floor. I'm going to speak about her. I'm going to speak about this court. I'm going to speak about the Gang of 14. And I'm going to speak about what should justify blocking a nominee of the President of the United States to serve in the courts. But for now, let me just say about her, I hope that my colleagues will listen to her qualifications, to listen to her story, and listen to the better angels of their natures. The present situation cannot stand, And if we continue on the present course, we will arrive at the same juncture that existed in May of 2005 when the Gang of 14 helped to save the Senate from a crisis. It would have been a crisis for the collegiality and civility of this institution. It would have been also a crisis for the country. And I hope that we can again avoid it if we permit this process to move forward and recognize that there is no extraordinary circumstance for any of these nominees that should block their approval by the United States Senate. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Alaska.
Madam President, request permission to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. This morning in the Help Committee, we had an opportunity to hear from the administrator of the Health Exchange, Ms. Tavener, who came before the committee to talk about where we are in the process now with the exchanges that have been set up through the Affordable Care Act. And it was an opportunity in the 5 minutes that we have allocated to each of us to pose questions to speak to the situation in Alaska as it relates to the exchanges. And I come to the floor this afternoon because there was so much that I, as one senator, had to say that you can't possibly condense into a 5-minute exchange. But it did cause me to want to take a moment to speak about what's happening on the ground in the state of Alaska. I think it's probably not an unfair assessment to say that most of the constituents that I am hearing from are not supportive of the Affordable Care Act and have been very skeptical about what benefits may come to our state. We are a high-cost state. High cost when it comes to health care and high cost when it comes to our insurance premiums. Right now, we are number 2 in the nation in terms of the premiums that Alaskans pay. And so as much as Alaskans might not like the Affordable Care Act, I hear very clearly their expressions of concerns about making sure that we are working actively and aggressively to reduce the cost of health care, to increase access to providers, and to increase access to insurance that is affordable. But affordability is such a key factor in what we face. I had a chance to query Ms. Tavener about the situation that we're seeing in the state of Alaska right now with regards to enrollments within the exchange. The state of Alaska has opted not to have its own state exchange. They're part of the federal exchange. Organization called Enroll Alaska, which was established to provide for outreach, education, and enrollment of Alaskans into the federally facilitated marketplace. I met with a representative from Enroll Alaska just about 10 days or so ago. It was just about the 27th of October, I believe. And at that point in time was informed that there was one Alaskan that had been successfully enrolled. I met with the navigators for the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium, United Way, Providence Hospital. They confirmed that no one had been successfully enrolled at that point in time. Move it forward to yesterday. As of yesterday, it has been confirmed that Enroll Alaska, the entity that has been set up specifically to advance enrollment within the exchanges, has been able to enroll just 3 individuals and has not been able to confirm that anyone else in the state has been successfully enrolled. So as folks are talking in different parts of the country about what's happening, they're using numbers several thousand, several hundred initially, but it has been not only surprisingly slow, astonishingly slow, to the point where people are saying, is it even open? Let me suggest that in Alaska, things are not really open right now. Enroll Alaska made a determination last week that they had discovered that the FFM, the federally facilitated marketplace, was calculating the subsidy for Alaskans incorrectly. And so due to this, they suspended all their enrollments until this issue was resolved. I brought this up with the administrator in a committee this morning. She acknowledged that, in fact, they had learned that perhaps the calculation was incorrect and that they were, quote, working on it. Well, in the meantime, you have folks that are interested in signing up, wanting to avail themselves of the Affordable Care Act, or one of the 5,600 who received a letter on Friday telling them that their insurance with Primera was going to be canceled at year end, and being told that, well, you can, in fact, sign up for what Primera is going to offer, but in looking at they're learning that not only are their premiums going to increase, but in many cases they may double, and the deductible will increase. So they want to know, am I going to get a better deal on the exchange? Our problem is not being able to access, to utilize, to gain the information when the entity that has been set up to help facilitate this says that they have suspended all enrollments until this issue is resolved. And further, going into their letter that was received last week, they say, we ask for the Obama administration to pull the website down, rebuild it, and redeploy it. Again, these are entities that are banking on the exchange to work. They want to help facilitate it. And things are as confused and complicated and, quite honestly, a mess with the exchange up north that they're saying, we're not going to push further if we're not certain that the subsidy is being calculated correctly. It's not right to tell people that you can sign up in the state of Alaska right now. So the exchanges, we recognize, are a mess, and they need to be addressed. I think we have recognized that at some point in time they will be addressed, they will be corrected. The administrator has indicated that between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, the exchanges are going to be down so that they can work on it, so that they can be addressing these software glitches. Well, 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. For those of us that are living on the West Coast, this is about the time when the dinner dishes are done, the kids' homework is done, they're in bed, and you can actually sit down at your computer and go online and try to figure out what might be the best option for you on an exchange. But we're being told that the exchange is going to be down between the time that most Alaskans and certainly Hawaiians that are 5 hours time difference instead of just the 4 hours that Alaskans are, that we're not even going to be able to go online and to address it there. That's one aspect of it, is where we are with the exchanges and what that's going to mean if we're still going to continue with the deadlines that have been put in place by the administration in terms of when you have to sign up by and when you may be assessed a fine or a penalty for failure to successfully enroll. I mentioned that on Friday there were some 5,600 Alaskans, actually, 5,360 Alaskans who received discontinuation notices from Primera. Primera is the largest health insurer in Alaska. This represents about 60% of the folks that Primera insures within the state in terms of its individual members. So when you think about these folks that have now received their letters this weekend, recognize that the policies that they have had for a period of time are not going to be available to them. They read in the news and they see on the evening news that the ability to get online and to better understand what's going on with the exchange is not available to them because the exchanges are down while they're working on them here in Washington, D.C., or wherever they're working on them. And that the entities, the navigators, the Enroll Alaska, those that have been put out there to help them navigate this process, are effectively saying, we can't enroll you right now, and we won't until there is greater assurance that the system is up and running and working. And the administrator has confirmed to us today that, well, we're working on it. But in the meantime, we still have these deadlines that folks are facing. The emails that have been coming to my office of late, though, have not been concerns with the exchange themselves. What we have seen in the past few weeks has been a concern, an outcry about what people will be expected to pay for their insurance once all aspects of the Affordable Care Act come into play. Now, I mentioned already, Madam President, that Alaska faces the second highest premiums in the country. We're high for a lot of things, though. Our energy costs are some of the highest in the nation. Our transportation costs are some of the highest in the nation. Our food costs are some of the highest in the nation. Our health care costs are some of the highest in the nation. And now our premiums are going to be some of the highest in the nation. But we recognize that to live in Alaska, it's expensive. So when you look at the average wages of an Alaskan, they're a little bit higher than you might see in other parts of the country. That's a good thing. That's going to help you pay for your transportation, for your fuel, for your food. But when we're talking about any level of subsidy, this is a concern that we're seeing around the state. The higher income levels are going to kick you out of being eligible for any level of subsidy. So we've got Alaskans that are trying to be diligent about their health care and the insurance, wanting to be able to provide for their family, and they're trying to figure out, well, where do I go? I've got a letter here from a gentleman in Fairbanks. He runs a small knife and tool shop there, and he's indicated that he was on Primera. He got the notice that they were not going to continue his coverage. New policy with them, the least expensive that he could get, was going to cost $1,260 up from $575. This is over a 60% increase that he is going to experience. On top of that, his deductible is also going up from $5,000 to $6,300, an increase of about $2,700. Got an email from a woman who's in the 55 and above age bracket, she says, and she says, we make a decent income, and so we won't be eligible for the subsidies. We have looked at this, but she said that they're going to be seeing premiums of over $1,500 a month. She says this is more than our mortgage. This is like taking on a second mortgage. And also, in her situation, she says, my deductible has gone from $5,000 to $6,300. So deductibles are going up, premiums are escalating, and this woman says, you know, am I going to be in a situation where it's just going to be cheaper for me to pay the fines? So I started going back through the binder that I have utilized to collect the emails from Alaskans over the past few weeks here. A woman in Anchorage says that her rates are going to increase 23% from last year. A woman from Talkeetna says it's an increase of 47% with one fewer member in the family insured, a $10,000 deductible, but she's going up by 47%. Out in Wasilla, this woman has indicated, I calculated we're expected to have an increased monthly premium of 224%. Our premiums will be exceeding our mortgage by more than $300 a month. William in Anchorage says that his health insurance has gone up 115%. Out in Anchorage, a woman's facing an increase in premiums of 45%. And again, she has indicated that she's been informed that she's not going to be eligible for any level of tax, of a subsidy. The gentleman in this email, Anthony out of Valdez, has said he's looking at an 85% increase in his premiums, and that's just over the past 4 months. When he started out, he's a single guy. He's 41 years old. He says, I'm healthy. I've got money in my health savings account. But he's got a situation where he's going to be paying an 85% increase in his medical insurance premiums. And, you know, I go through these aren't statistics. These are addressed to, you know, I know this is not about you, Lisa Murkowski, but about representation for the people of Alaska. Address this. They're asking me to help them out because they can't afford the Affordable Care Act. And so I go through each of these, and whether it's the folks in Petersburg who are a 25-year-old male non-smoker who had a $10,000 deductible, and he was paying $102 a month. Now he's going to have to pay $281 with a $6,300 deductible. A 35-year-old male non-smoker paying $159 a month now has to pay $340. A 63-year-old male non-smoker paying $525 a month as of January, paying $827. We go through these stories. But these stories are people that we represent. whether it's Tom or Wenda or Teresa or Chris or Mark, they're saying, I thought what was coming our way with health care reform was reform that was going to increase my access and decrease my costs. Frustration with the website is one thing, Madam President, and I am hopeful that we get on the other side of that very, very soon. The people of Alaska they're done holding their breath on this. They're basically saying, call me when you have it fixed. But what they're concerned about is they're going to get that call, and we're going to be up against the end of the year, and they've already got their notices saying, we're not going to continue this coverage. And they're worried about, well, what happens if we do have a family medical emergency in early January and this all hasn't knitted together? I didn't get a very satisfactory answer from the administrator this afternoon in response to that question. I want to be able to have good answers to these people, but I am extraordinarily concerned that as we address the issues with the website, the issues that the people in Alaska who already face some of the highest costs for living in a state are going to be seeing increased insurance costs that will be out of their range, out of their ability to pay. And the subsidies that they would like to think would make a difference are not available to them. Madam President, we have a great deal of work to do here in this Congress to address health care reform, to address the driving costs that are making all of these stories that are coming to me and coming to all of us, saying, what are you going to do to address the concerns in my family? When I'm trying to figure out how I knit it all together, they want to know at the end of the day, how have we reformed health care? How have we made our costs lower and increased our access? I would suggest that we have much more work to do. And I stand ready to work with my colleagues on this side of the aisle, on the other side of the aisle, in the other body. Because we can fight and argue about whether the website, the exchanges are going to work or going to fail on their own, whether we need to push deadlines out. This is just one part of what we're talking about. We've got to be doing a better job when it comes to reining in the cost of health care itself. How we deal with the delivery system that we really haven't touched. How we deal with those markets like Alaska or other rural places where, because we don't have a very attractive market, it would certainly help us if we could purchase our insurance across state lines. How we work to make sure that when we have payment structures, that the incentives are in the right place so that we're not encouraging inefficiencies within a system. We have so much more that we need to be doing. And I would just encourage us, let's not lose sight of what we have to do in resolving our issues as they relate to bringing down the cost of health care at the end of the day. I note that my colleague from Tennessee is here on the floor, and I would certainly yield the floor and thank him for his leadership as the ranking member on the Health Committee and the very thoughtful issues that he raised this morning. Thank you, Madam President.
Madam President.
Senator from Tennessee.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank the Senator from Alaska for her excellent remarks. I was glad I was here to see them. She and